So hello. Thank you for joining us. I think we have echo.
Sorry.
Shall I continue? Okay. We're good. We're good? Okay. So hello again. This is AIDV-WG. I'm a medical doctor and a professor in ethics. I'm from Turkey, Tobet University, History of Medicine and Ethics Department, and I'm also the Deputy Dean of School of Medicine. So this session is both in person and also in virtual format, and we're going to discuss what ethical, legal, social, and technical frameworks for artificial intelligence and data visitation are required to support the open sharing and reuse of data in the framework of open science. So we'll explore the key considerations for the development of an ethics of AI that facilitates knowledge sharing, resource access for reuse and innovation. Also, we'll look at the ethical aspects of the interaction between AI and data with regard to integrity, responsibilities, ethical aspects of the interaction between AI and data, and trust also. So we have first speakers, 6 speakers, including me. We're going to just share our ideas and thoughts in our designated subjects, and then we'll have a short open discussion which will be moderated by Francis, and then we'll have a summary of the workshop from our reporter and fellow Manolia, and that will be the end of workshop. So the presentations, I think you have already gone through the agenda, so the presentations are quite ambitious, and we have 1.5 hours. That's why I'm going to be short and just give the floor to the to our first speaker, Connie Claire, for her presentation on decision-making procedures in data management and data stewardship for open science. So, Connie, the floor is yours. We can't hear you.
Let's see. We need to change the speakers there.
It was working fine before, so let me quickly see.
Can you try again? No.
And if we have a look at the mic. Yeah, online can hear you. I can't see. Wait a minute. Speakers.
Oh, it's right. It's correct speakers. Put same system as microphone. No.
No, that for sure not. I think we need for the not for microphone but for the speakers. I wonder which ones are there. I think we can do this.
Sorry, we look for some technical support here because it's a weird system. Yeah. I don't know how to change that here. Let's just try. That's my computer normally.
Yeah.
Can you try now, Connie? No, it's still not working. No. Oh, okay. Yeah. Could someone else who's online try to speak? Maybe Nielsa or somebody just try to say, Alexander, say hello. Same problem. Okay. Okay. So, Connie, we cannot blame you, which is unfortunate. Yeah, we're not. Maybe you just have to raise the volume. Is that it?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. But we cannot hear them.
from yeah, you're speaking just here. And
Yeah. Connie, could you say something again?
Okay. Like she can sound.
So they are speaking
We-
here. We cannot hear them here.
In this room.
Okay.
In this
So this is in both. Like.
We need to hear them here.
Yeah. Okay. Here.
Are the speakers turned up? Yeah, they are. So what's the problem? How can that possibly be?
Let's check if what. Yeah.
Can we go to the third one? The one that says select this speaker.
It can be just
No, in a second. Here.
the speakers.
I can see so good from.
Třetí od shora zkusíme.
Yeah, that one. Can you try again?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yay! It works.
Good try.
Okay, can everybody hear me like well enough now in the room?
Yes.
Very good.
Okay, really good, that's great. Okay, so I'm just going to try and share my slides. So everybody should now see the slides on the screen? Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to be here at the session at the EOSC Symposium virtually to talk a bit about decision-making procedures in data management and data stewardship for open science. My name's Connie Clare, and I'm the Community Development Manager at the Research Data Alliance. And I thought it's quite important just to start with a bit of a disclaimer. Most of the things that I'm going to talk about in the next 10 minutes or so are from my own experience as a researcher and working as a community manager, so I've never actually been a data steward. I have worked closely with data stewards in my role, and also I'm not an expert on AI and the ethics of AI, so I'm really delighted to be here to learn from some of you today. I'm sure Francis can also share my slides. They are available on Zenodo. I also wanted to just point out this picture that I've used for the front cover, because I think it's quite important actually that when we think about the road to open, it's not always straightforward for researchers like the image might portray. But often we know, there's lots of different decisions that need to be taken by researchers to really achieve good research data management practice and open science. And a lot of those decisions are quite complex and require the help of a data supporter, such as a data steward. So as an overview, when I'm talking about research data management, I'm sure most of you in the audience know what that means. We're talking about standard best practices for accurate data or code collection, processing, documentation, analysis, storage and preservation, so the whole research data workflow. And that is really an important prerequisite for open science. So we need to really pay attention to all of those different processes and decisions to make sure that we can share data openly. And when I use the term open, I probably should really use the term fair instead, because we realise that fair does not always mean open, but we should be as open as possible and as closed as necessary when it comes to data. And also, I'll move on to talking a little bit about the decisions that researchers need to make, or some considerations that influence decisions when it comes to creating fair data. And then we'll move on at the end just to talk a bit about data-centric AI and the role of data stewards, or some of the challenges that data stewards might actually face. So what decisions do researchers make when it comes to achieving fair data management? At the heart of this, obviously, we have the researcher and we have a data supporter. But then enforced upon that are institutional, journal and funder policies, and also maybe the requirement to create a data management plan. So what kinds of decisions and considerations do researchers need to think about? Who is responsible for the data management? Will somebody be hired to help, or will it be down to the researcher? And what kinds of resources are available in time and monetary resources to make sure that the data will be findable, accessible, interoperable and reusable? And will this project be about the creation of new data, or will it actually be using existing data from another source? And what types of data, formats and volumes will be produced in the project? Because this will also implicate and stipulate how that data needs to be managed. So if we're talking about structured data in a machine readable and interoperable format, for example, then this can really help others to be able to reuse it. And then they might want to consider what kind of metadata and documentation they need to describe the data set. And then within that, are there any disciplinary standards, vocabularies, ontologies, or taxonomies that really need to be used to make sure the data is reusable? What kinds of data quality control measures need to be put in place to make sure that the data is as correct as possible and to ensure research integrity? And will any personal data be collected, or is data going to be collected from a third party that might contain personal data? And how does this comply with GDPR and other legislation on data security, for example? And does the researcher need to consider going through an ethical review, so the Human Research Ethical Committee or an ethical review board? And if they're actually collecting data from human participants, maybe they need to consider collecting informed consent to share that data at the end of the project. And again, thinking about personal data, does it need to be anonymized or pseudonymized? And are there any other ethical issues that need to be taken into account? Any codes of conduct? And for example, with commercially sensitive data, there might be some legal implications, such as intellectual property rights, or copyright or ownership, and what kinds of legislation or legal teams and legal experts do researchers need to talk to? And then thinking about the practicalities of actually managing the data. How will the data and metadata be stored and backed up? Which servers will it be stored on, and how many copies need to be backed up, for example? And where will the data be preserved in the long term? And how do we select which data is to be preserved? Often in big data projects, not all of the data can be preserved. Will it be in an archive, or will it be in a repository? And will we consider assigning a persistent identifier, for example, in the form of a DOI, so that the data can be linked to other publications and resources and found in the long term? And then when we thought about preserving the data, how, when, and which data will we share, and do we need to actually place data under an embargo for a period of time? And when we're thinking about sharing, which kinds of licenses, whether it be Creative Commons or another license, do we need to use to specify how the data can be modified, redistributed, and reused? And what kind of methods or software tools might be needed, like open source, for example, or proprietary? Not necessarily, but still, what kinds of tools will be needed to then access and actually use that data? So as you can see, this is really overwhelming, and I'm sure most of you in the audience know most of these different considerations. But when it comes to actually ethics of research, these are the kinds of decisions that need to be made in order to be responsible and to create fair data. And when we look at the Go Fair website, for example, and think about the FAIR principles that were established in 2016, the focus is really on machine actionability for automated discovery. So this capacity of computational systems being able to find, access, interoperate, and reuse data with none or minimal human intervention. And thinking about the findability principle, that machine readable metadata is really essential for this automatic discovery of data sets, and it's a critical component of the verification process. So thinking about computers doing a lot of the work when it comes to data reuse, we can't forget then about AI, and particularly data-centric AI. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm not an expert on this, but my understanding is this is using data and data being at the real heart of the automated decision-making process, so that data rather than models become fundamental for the training and deployment of AI models. And as we've seen from the previous slide, all of those various steps through the research data workflow, all of that curation is really critical to ensure that you have a good input data set to feed into an AI model. And I just thought I'd share this quote from the FAIR ML book. Machine learning or AI models are only as good as the data that they're trained on. So I think that really places the emphasis on good data stewardship and having a good quality data set to begin with. And I actually spoke with a few of my data steward colleagues about what they think are the challenges to AI ethics. And here's what some of them have come up with. So one of the challenges is black box AI. So this is obviously the idea that The model operations and the input data sometimes remains a mystery, so that you don't know how the outputs are generated. And this causes some concern for the input data quality and the provenance and the origin of the input data. And when we think about computers being able to just use any open data sets, of course, then this can actually lead to inconsistent results and what we call AI bias. And the other concern was that AI bias could be due to overgeneralization. So the fact that there is insufficient representative input data. So taking, for example, some of the AI models in the criminal justice system and also healthcare, which have actually focused more on data sets from white males, for example, which introduces a race and ethnicity and gender bias. But also there might be biases due to unsuitable data collection at the start of research projects, issues with processing and cleaning data, so removing outliers and removing duplicate values can also skew data and create a bias. Using poor quality input data, poor annotation or mislabeling of data, and then obviously poor AI model design can all propagate this bias and lead to concerns for scientific validity. And then another concern of AI ethics that came up from the data stewards was this idea of data misuse. So it's okay, everybody publishing fair data and sharing as openly as possible, but obviously then it's out of the hands of the creator in some senses as to how that data is then used. And sometimes, it could be that an AI model may make inferences incorrectly about a data set that could cause harm for a particular population. And then a final challenge that was raised was this idea that there are a lack of standard tools and mechanisms to really be able to critically evaluate data quality and to assess whether data sets are really fit for purpose when it comes to AI. And I think I might be going over time, so I'm going to stop there and say thank you so much for your attention. That was quite a basic overview, but good to get us started, I think. And I'd like to also acknowledge my colleagues that helped with some thoughts for this presentation today.
So,
I will stop sharing.
okay, thank you. Can they hear me?
No, you need to.
No, I need to.
Yeah.
I don't see
Uh,
what I'll do.
Yeah, you have to see it here. You can do it. Okay, I think they can
Okay.
hear you. Yeah.
So, Connie, can you hear me?
Yes, I can
okay.
hear you.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. It was really great. What I propose is to just go on with the presentations and leave the questions to the discussion that Francis is going to facilitate
That's okay.
for the sake of time. Yeah.
But Connie has to leave. She can't stay. She has
Oh,
another
okay.
engagement, so
Okay,
we
so
can see if there are some-
yeah, so if there's a question for Connie from the audience or from the group on Zoom, so we can just have the question.
I have a question.
You have a question. Okay, Francis has a question, so he's coming here.
Connie, I really like that you brought the AI bias into discussion here. That was good. What about, or what the data, the bias in the data, I should say, really. It could be AI bias as well. What about, I was wondering, what's the relationship between bias and integrity? So data integrity and data bias. And where should we fit data integrity into this scheme of a data management plan? You're the expert.
Well, I don't know if I'm the expert to answer, Francis. I think it's a good point. I think that it's a hard question because, of course, when anybody completes their data management plan and thinks about their data, I would say that they all think, they handle it with integrity. I guess all of these steps of the workflow that I tried to show are trying to work towards research integrity and making sure that the data is as correct as possible. And obviously opening the data up helps with that process because it can be validated and verified by others. But I think with bias, with the AI bias, for example, you don't really know how that AI model is going to use that particular data set and the inferences that might be made that are overlooked. Because I think most scientists or researchers publish data and don't necessarily think it will end up in that kind of model. You wouldn't think it might be used for AI, for example. And so I think that it's hard to make the link at the moment between integrity and bias. Maybe somebody else in the audience has got a better answer than me. But we need to be forward thinking, of course, and think about how data could end up being used in the future. Data that we don't necessarily think will be used for those purposes might have qualities that an AI model will be looking for. And then that's obviously when the bias comes in with regards to gender, ethnicity, and race, and things like that, and geographic, demographic, socioeconomic statuses and things. So, yeah, it's a very complex discussion to have.
Yeah, thank you. I think it was a hard question, Francis.
I think it was a good answer.
And it was a great answer. Yeah. So thank you so much, Connie. And wish you luck in your next session also. So
thank you so much.
Thank you. So let's proceed to the next speaker, which is me. So
we need again to
No, I did.
where is it? It's gone.
Can you see the slides? Okay, let me run for this.
No, I think we're okay.
Are we?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but
I did something.
yeah, we're okay.
So, are we okay?
Yeah, check with the audience.
So everybody can see the slides. Okay.
Check in the group.
So our group online, can you see the slides as well? I'm not sure if they can see me or hear me.
Sorry, can you? Oh, okay. We switched computers. That's not good. I think it's okay, Alif. But we have two Zooms.
We have two Zooms open.
Well, if it is okay, I can just proceed here, but probably the online presentation will not work with me. So if you do that, it's okay. So, okay.
They hear you online. I don't know if they can hear you online. They can't hear you online.
No, they can't.
Oh, stay here for a second.
I don't know what happened.
I don't know what happened.
If I go to Zoom.
It's Zoom.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
is it minimized?
It is.
There.
Yeah.
Hopefully not.
So
You
can everybody hear me?
No, it's still here. It's still here. I don't know what I did.
Princess, I can hear the speaker. This is Natalie.
Oh, hello, Natalie. You can hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
You can hear
Including the
Francis, but
speaker.
can you hear me too?
Yes, I
Yes.
can. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Great. So, do you have the presentation on? Can they see the presentation too? You'll share. Okay. So I'm starting. Hoping that everybody's hearing and seeing. Okay, so let me go. So my topic is trust and fair principles as core elements of AI ethics, data visitation, and open science. My main focus will be on trust, AI, and ethics and data visitation. So the enormous radical innovation and diffusion capacity of digitalization is empowered by artificial intelligence. And as more data is digitalized and provided to AI for machine learning and deep learning purposes, its capacity to initiate and urge a set of interconnected radical innovations that affects all levels of society, individual life, and business and governance enhanced. So we see digitalization and AI in all aspects of our lives. One of the speakers in the Global Privacy Assembly 2 weeks ago in Istanbul defined it as AI and digitalization, something like electricity, that is a base to all our works and all our technology. So what we have with open science added to this is that open science amplifies this innovation capacity by enhancing the accessibility to the knowledge that's already there. So as digitalization increases, more personal data will be transferred to the system, and users, and when I say users, I mean researchers, institutions, agencies, research agencies, and so on, should be aware of the fact that they are sharing private data and also their subjects' data with the AI system. And the AI system is generating private data by profiling or processing the available data. So, something. Sorry, yeah. And the AI system is using or making this private data available to third parties, and the third parties may or may not be using this data for their own ends, and these ends may be various and not defined at the time data is collected or generated. So probably the consent will not be taken for these purposes. And the risks about AI and big data exceeds the content and context of the GDPR. That's why we need to focus on the concept of trust. So what are the moral issues that go together with this discussion? The first one is the impossibility of full anonymization, which means harming the dignity and honor of the individuals by disrespecting the confidentiality and privacy. The second one is informed consent, overlooking the autonomy of the users by degrading them to mere data provider tools. There is, of course, discrimination, stigmatization, and expoliation. And the competence of the people who will use or have access to data is another moral issue. And for what ends the data and results will be used is another moral issue. So the users or the data providers, let me say, may not be aware of the exact ways of how their own data is used or processed. And they must trust, to give their data. And when we say trust, well, we talk about choosing trust in the absence of certainty or immediate personal access to truth. And there are two bases of trust, actually. The first one is that the trustee is inherently good and has an inherent desire to do good to the truster. And the second one is the trustee has the integrity to adhere to the acceptable, relevant ethical principles and values. And both of these bases are relevant in terms of AI, data visitation, and open science. So what does trusting a particular AI technology mean? Well, it can mean two things. The first one is trusting an agent, the real or legal person who may be held responsible in case of an ethical violation occurs. And this line of thinking is related to the first base of trust. For example, when people trust an institution or an agency, they hold the belief that that institution is inherently good and has a desire to do good to their clients or users. And the second one is mainly anthropomorphizing AI and directing the trust to a personified AI. And when we're talking about this kind of trust, we are merely talking about strong AI, human level AI, or above human level AI. And anthropomorphizing can be considered more appropriate for addressing issues about AI that can make autonomous decisions and act accordingly without the help or supervision of human beings. So the context of trust in AI and open science can be filtered into two elements. The first one is the initial trust. The truster can decide. Oops, where is it going? Yeah. The truster can decide whether to trust before any beforehand experience or knowledge is gathered. So this is initial trust, and this is mainly the trust that people show to the researchers or science, the initial trust, because they have the belief that it will do good to them. And the second one is adhering to. Continuous trust, which is typically built up gradually via ongoing interactions. And in terms of AI data visitation, we may be talking more about continuous trust than initial trust. And adhering to FAIR principles promotes initial and continuous trust in open science and AI by researchers. So just a summary of trust as an element of AI ethics. We can see it on 4 different groups. The first one is ethics of profession, and it indicates, why is it going without my, okay, all right. So the designer, ethics of profession, it means that the designer or the developer of the technology complies with professional codes of conduct, and the problem is most of the time these professional codes of conduct are not written down. And the second one is ethics in design. It's a value-sensitive design that accounts for values such as privacy, transparency, or accuracy in design and development. The third one is ethics of user, or let me say usage, and it indicates that the user will comply with basic moral duties to respect human dignity and human rights. And the last one is ethics in design, and it investigates the possible impact of technology on existing values to understand if the AI technology, or let me say open science used for these ends, is promoting or demoting existing values. So the trustworthiness of AI, it is quite referenced in terms of EU documents, the trustworthy AI, and its reliability. It depends on the belief that the AI will follow accurate algorithm pattern to produce expected results. So accuracy, precision, sustainability, cost effectiveness, and fair access is involved in this line of thinking. And also a strong expectation that AI and developers and users of AI will meet the benevolence-based and integrity-based criteria of trust. Okay, a few words on different dimensions of rebuilding trust. There are 3 dimensions of this. The first one is performance, then the process, and the purpose. When we talk about performance, we are saying that AI has operational safety, accuracy, confidentiality, and data safety. And when we are talking about process, we're talking about explainability, and there's the black box problem, which I'm not going to go in details. And then the purpose, which means that AI is not intending to cause harm or risk of harm by default. And the values, virtues, and dimensions of trust expected from the trustee may change in weight and content in terms of domains of sectors. For example, in an AI system designed to assess the open science and data visitation in pandemics, performance and purpose dimensions are the most important dimensions of trust. And respecting the FAIR principles may enhance both dimensions that promote trust and enhance open science practices among the scientific community. So my last words, when we are rethinking trust as an element of a moral stance in AI, life cycle, and open science, maybe we should consider these questions. The first one is, what is the ultimate goal of open science and data visitation? Consider the consequence of open science and data visitation in terms of ethical compliance with fair data sharing principles. We should refrain from positioning ethics as a compliance list. I think that's a mistake that we all do from time to time, and consider it as a guide for all life cycle of AI and open science. And also we should consider if open science and data visitation practice promotes or demotes fundamental human values such as privacy, confidentiality, human integrity, or autonomy. And also request or depend on ethics consultancy in the whole life cycle of AI and open science, and create awareness in all stakeholders about ethical implications of the practice. And finally, let me say that ethics alone does not motivate people to do the right thing, and ethical stance should be backed up with legal regulations and sturdy guidelines, and probably making the ethical choice the easiest choice for all stakeholders would be a good step forward. So that's my presentation. And if you have any burning questions, I would like to answer. If not, maybe we can proceed to the next speaker in terms of time limits. So I'm not seeing anyone online, so I don't see if...
I don't see anybody.
Okay, great. So our next speaker is Professor Anne Cameron-Thompson, and her topic is Consent and AI in Open Science Framework. So Anne, can you hear us? Let me stop sharing this. Anne, can you hear us?
I don't think Anne is online.
She's not online?
No.
Okay. Maybe we can just pass to the next speaker. Yeah, okay. Is Alexander here? Alexander, hi.
Yes, I am. Sorry, I was unmuting there. Let me get my video going, and I have some slides to share.
All right.
Yeah, happy to dive right into my talk. Just a moment. So this is adapted. Can everybody see my screen? It's not in...
Yeah, we can see your screen. The slides are not in full screen mode, but it's okay.
There we are. Slideshow. All right, so thank you so much for having me. My talk today is entitled Practicing Ethics and Data Stewardship in Open Biorepositories. And this talk essentially is intended to address what happens if we're not able to align the data use conditions that are applicable to biomedical data sets that are stored across different repositories for things that have to do with local, ethical, legal, and normative requirements. So as we know, one of the major critiques of data protection legislation, of national biomedical research ethics requirements, has been that these different requirements don't lend themselves to compatible downstream data use, which means that even if a number of different normative claims or legal frameworks are completely legitimate ways of regulating data in and of themselves, they can lend themselves to downstream users of that information not being able to repurpose data at scale. In short, what acts as a completely legitimate, completely necessary regulatory framework at the local level can actually preclude the harmonious use of that information from a downstream standpoint. Now, the solution to this, of course, is not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. That is, the solution to this is not simply to strip away our regulatory requirements and argue for the unregulated use of information, but it's to recognize that this is a fundamental challenge inherent in designing local data protection, local data privacy, and local ethical legal norms, and so that these should be designed with interoperability in mind. And to speak briefly to what interoperability is, just as at the technical level, for those of you with technical backgrounds, there are issues related to how one formats data and how one chooses things like file types, ontologies, and so forth, which can determine whether or not the information can easily be repurposed for future use. These same considerations arise in applying legal, ethical, and institutional standards to information use from an ethical standpoint, from a legal standpoint. If we look at the kinds of rules that are applicable to downstream data use, we can immediately see that some of these rules arise from binding public law. So that is national standards that are applicable to the use of information, really that are immutable and can't be changed by the local institution. But some arise from things called private law or soft law, which are left to the interpretation or are left to the choice of the institutions that apply them. So here we think of things like contract, intellectual property licenses, or institutional policies regarding information use. Now, one thing we need to ask ourselves is, this is a theoretical risk we've described here, that lots of different institutions will generate health information, will want to repurpose it, will generally make it available for future downstream use, and then lastly, will ultimately find themselves incapable of using it together because the standards applicable to each are not compatible. So this is a theoretical risk that we've described. One of the questions that we need to ask ourselves is this risk borne out in reality? And here I'm presenting a few results from a project called EU Can Share, which was conducted. It was one of the Horizon 2020 projects, and one of the initiatives that was launched was essentially a comparative effort to look at the ethical and legal and institutional conditions of use applicable to data generated from some 28 or so population health cohorts. So again, this is data that was generated across 20 years of time or so. And so understandably, because of changes in applicable law, applicable policy, changes in institutional data stewards, there were significant differences in the legal rules and the institutional rules applicable to the use of the data throughout its life cycle. And if we look at the results of this analysis, we have two tables. So this table is the first of the two, and it actually suggests that the rules applicable to the use of the data are fairly compatible. Here on the left side, we see a list of each of the cohorts, and then it's assessed relative to two questions. Firstly, whether the information can be, the data can be repurposed at all, and secondly, whether that information can be repurposed for international research efforts. So really, if the data can flow across national borders. And here, a green indicator means that there's no limitation and that this sort of thing is explicitly allowed. Orange is yes, but with conditions and caveats, meaning that the information can flow across national borders or can be repurposed, subject to certain conditions. Red is really an outright preclusion, and yellow simply means that no information to this effect is available. It's not clear from reading the applicable conditions whether that information use is permissible or not. However, if we look at the more granular information available in this table, we see that even though the general rules that guide information use are compatible to one another, the downstream conditions according to which that information can be used, meaning the things that a specific principal investigator must do in order to use the information in compliance with legal and normative requirements, these are very different, and in fact, there's lots of restrictions. So things like the discretionary permissions management, so essentially the fact that a custodian must decide as to each data access request rather than allowing it according to more generalized rules, the conditions according to which the research can be the research data can be used, the economic sectors and kinds of actors, so for-profit, non-profit, public sector, academic research sector, things like that. There were significant differences, and this can utterly impede the downstream use. Of course, on the first hand, because the reasons for which this information can be used become incompatible, but also simply because the sheer amount of human effort, human labor that principal investigators must perform in reusing the information becomes too great, meaning that even if there weren't outright incompatibilities between the different data sets, performing an accurate assessment of whether the information can or can't be used becomes difficult for prospective downstream users. So what kind of solutions might we anticipate for this problem? And this table here, I won't go into it in detail in the interest of time, but essentially it's a similar effort that was performed for a different set of population health cohorts. And it showed really similar results. So here the idea that we get out of this table is that this problem of interoperability, which we're describing, is not unique to this EU CanShare effort. The results appear to be generalizable across different sets of consortia. So that being said, what kinds of things can we do to address these issues? And here to tie this back to AI, really one of the greatest issues is that insofar as data sets generated in different contexts can't be repurposed for things like